My name is Harper Langston. I'm 28, the middle child of the Langston family, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the outlier. While my brother Nathaniel aced prep school and followed Dad into the financial world with a Wharton MBA, and my sister Camille dazzled at Yale before launching her political PR firm, I taught myself to code in middle school and spent Friday nights debugging apps instead of attending cotillion practice. Tonight, I sat in the glass-walled solarium of my family's estate in Weston, enduring our annual Langston family dinner, a tradition cloaked in mahogany wood, white wine, and whispered judgment. I arrived in my decade-old Civic, wearing a simple black dress from a local boutique. It was the kind of outfit my mother, Vivian Langston, would call plain, with a half-smile and a raised brow. She greeted me with an air kiss and a comment about traffic, clearly just filler until she could get to the real subject of the evening, Nathaniel's promotion. My father, Charles Langston, a retired partner at Harrington and Bell Capital, stood near the fireplace, his crystal tumbler of scotch in hand, nodding proudly as Nathaniel explained how he was now managing the firm's top-tier portfolio. Camille chimed in with tales of her upcoming engagement, and the senator, her fiancé, had just signed as a client. I smiled, nodded, sipped my wine, and waited for my turn to be dismissed. When it came, it arrived with surgical precision. "And, Harper, how's your project?" my mother asked, already reaching for a canap tray. "It's not a project," I replied, keeping my tone even. "Langston Health is expanding. We just signed 5 new hospital partners." "That's wonderful," she said absently, turning to refill a glass. My father didn't even look up. "Still at that tech startup?" he muttered. "It's not a startup anymore, Dad. We're preparing for an IPO. That made him glance at me, but only briefly before turning back to Nathaniel. It wasn't that they doubted my intelligence. It was that they had already decided what counted as success, and my path didn't qualify. I'd long stopped trying to impress them, but that didn't make moments like these easier. Dinner was served in the dining room under the same chandelier that had hung over every holiday meal of my childhood. The seats hadn't changed either. Nathaniel to Dad's right, Camille next to Mom. I sat across from the antique portrait of my great-grandfather, who had apparently advised President Truman on economic policy. My chair was closest to the kitchen door. Halfway through the main course, duck l'orange. No surprise, my father cleared his throat. "We've been reviewing the estate," he said. Silence fell like a curtain. With Nathaniel's career trajectory and Camille's upcoming marriage, it seems appropriate to adjust the trust allocations. My mother nodded. "Camille and her fiancé will receive the Nantucket property. Nathaniel will assume management of the investment accounts." I chewed my duck carefully. Here it comes. "As for you, Harper," my father continued, "we've decided to suspend your share of the family trust." I set down my fork. "Suspend it? Until you find a more traditional path," my mother added, not unkindly, just firmly. "What you're doing, it's admirable in a way, but it doesn't align with the Langston legacy." I looked at their faces, perfectly composed, utterly convinced this was reasonable. Camille offered a soft shrug. "It's just temporary. You're still young." Nathaniel sipped his wine. "You've always been the free spirit, Harper, but there are standards to maintain." I opened my mouth to reply, but my phone buzzed insistently in my purse. It was my COO, Elise. She never called during family events unless something was urgent. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway, answering the call with a whisper. "Elise?" "Harper," she said breathlessly. "Soft Wave just confirmed. $40 million, pre-IPO valuation, $100 million, and Forbes wants a profile. I stood frozen in place, the chandelier light catching the edge of my wine glass. They committed? Completely. Contract signed. We're celebrating in the office. Thank you, I said, my voice catching. Tell everyone I'll be in tomorrow, and at least send flowers to the legal team. They pulled off a miracle. I returned to the dining room and slid back into my seat. Everything okay? Camille asked, eyebrows arched. I picked up my fork. Better than okay. Work? My father grunted. You might say that. I took a sip of wine. That little tech job, Nathaniel said with a smirk. Just secured $40 million in funding, I replied calmly. Langston Health's valuation is now $100 million. For a moment, no one spoke. My mother blinked. $100 million? Pre-IPO, I clarified. We're going public this quarter. You're going public? My father asked slowly, as if tasting the words. Through what, underwriter? Halverson Morgan, I said. Your old firm made an offer, but I declined. Conflict of interest. Camille set down her glass. That's unexpected. Not to me, I said. To you, perhaps, but not to the hospital networks who've already signed on, not to the patients we've helped. Why didn't you tell us? My mother asked, and for the first time, her voice cracked a little. Because you never asked, I said, and I got tired of waiting for you to care. The rest of the meal passed in awkward quiet. My father didn't speak again. Nathaniel stared into his plate. Camille tried once to bring up my brother-in-law's new political client, but no one responded. When dessert arrived CRME Burl, I didn't touch. I stood and placed my napkin beside the plate. If you'll excuse me, I have a call with London investors in an hour. Harper, my mother began, standing, we'd like to revisit this trust conversation. Don't bother, I said gently. You've made your priorities clear. So have I. As I stepped outside into the crisp New England night, my phone buzzed again. A text from Elise. Congrats, boss. You're officially a unicorn in the making. I looked back at the Langston house, golden lights glowing in every window, and felt something I hadn't in years. Not anger, not bitterness, freedom. The next morning, I arrived at the Langston Health office in Kendall Square earlier than usual, the hum of dawn barely brushing the glass facade of the building. The team was already gathering, a buzz of energy rippling through the space like static before a storm. Elise stood near the conference room with a tray of espresso shots, eyes bright behind tortoiseshell glasses. When she saw me, she raised an eyebrow and whispered, "How was dinner?" I gave her a half smile. Let's just say we no longer need to worry about Langston Family Fund and interfering with the cap table. A wave of laughter rolled across the room, light but charged. The room quieted as I stepped in, every face turning to me with anticipation, not for drama, but because they believed in what we'd built together. For a moment, I just stood there, taking in the team. We had started in a co-working closet with cracked floors and no air conditioning, and now we occupied the 17th floor of one of the most modern buildings in Boston, with 3 satellite offices and hospital systems in 12 states. I raised my coffee. Here's to Softwave, here's to our mission, and here's to doing it our way. Glasses clinked and applause filled the room. Later, alone in my office, I stared out over the Charles River, the skyline crisp and unwavering in the morning light. My inbox overflowed. Forbes, TechCrunch, the Boston Globe, all wanting interviews. Investors I hadn't heard from in years were suddenly interested again. And then there were the personal messages. My mother had sent Flowers orchids, her go-to for damage control. The note said, "So proud of our brilliant Harper. Love, Mom and Dad." There was no acknowledgement of what had happened at dinner, just a sudden pivot, as if the past could be rewritten by a flower delivery. My brother texted, "Drinks this week? Got a few contacts in healthcare investing who might be helpful." Camille sent an Instagram DM because of course she did. "Let me know if you'd be open to speaking at our fundraiser next month. Brian's campaign is looking for tech-forward stories." I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I picked up my phone and called the only person who had ever really understood me in that family. "Aunt Lila," I said when she answered, her voice sleepy but warm. "You up for a drive?" Within an hour, I was parked outside her brick townhouse near Cambridge Common. She climbed into the passenger seat with a reusable mug of tea and her usual giant scarf looped twice around her neck. "You look like you just took over the world," she said, eyeing me, "and like it cost you something." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. We drove without destination, winding through the narrow streets of Somerville and then out toward the coast. She didn't ask for details, just let the silence stretch until it felt like comfort, not absence. Finally, I told her everything, from the moment they cut me off to the stunned faces at the mention of Softwave's investment. She chuckled at the image of my father's frozen fork midair. "They never really saw you," she said softly. "Not as you are, only as what they hoped you'd become." I nodded again. "And now that I'm viable, they want back in." "Of course they do," she said. "But you know what's worse than being ignored by your family? Letting them define your worth when they finally notice." We park near Rockport, watching the waves slap quietly against the shore. "You think I should cut them off completely?" I asked. "No," she said, brushing windblown hair from her face. "You draw your lines, but don't build your identity around rejection either. You've already won. Now you get to decide what to do with that power." Back at the office, the rest of the day moved like a current. Media briefings, legal documents, and champagne toasts blurred together. But beneath the swirl, I felt something shift. Not just in my career, but in me. I was no longer the Langston black sheep. I was the woman who built something without anyone's permission. That night, Elise and I sat in my South Boston loft, takeout containers between us, feet tucked under throw blankets. "So," she said, plucking a dumpling from the box, "do they know yet? That I'm not interested in their sudden interest?" I sipped my tea. "Not yet, but they will." "Are you going to tell them directly?" "No," I said. "I'm going to show them." The next morning, I drafted the press release for the Mitchell Innovation Foundation, though now it bore a new name. The Langston Initiative. $20 million, seeded personally by me, dedicated to funding young women in health tech. My team would run the logistics. Elise would lead mentorship programs. And I would show up to every keynote, every panel, every high school classroom that needed to hear one simple message. You are not invisible. You are not too different. You are exactly what this world needs. 2 days later, the Boston Globe ran a full feature, From Family Disappointment to Tech Trailblazer. The woman behind Langston Health. The story mentioned the family dinner, though I downplayed it. What mattered wasn't the cut, it was what I did afterward. The emails from girls across the country poured in. From Mississippi, from Montana, from a Navajo reservation in New Mexico. One simply read, "My dad says coding is for losers. Your story makes me want to prove him wrong." That was the moment I knew I hadn't just built a company. I had built a movement. And no family dinner, no trust fund, no wine glass clinked in false celebration could ever take that away. The auditorium at Eastbrook High smelled faintly of floor wax and popcorn. Its folding seats, worn down from decades of school assemblies and parent-teacher nights, but today it was filled with something different electricity. Over 300 students sat hunched in rows, some whispering, others scrolling their phones, waiting to see who this tech CEO speaker was and why she mattered more than skipping fifth period. I stood behind the curtain, my palms cold despite the heat of the overhead lights, listening to the principal's introduction. She's a graduate of MIT, the founder and CEO of Langston Health, and she's here today because she believes in you. When my name was called and I stepped onto the stage, the applause was polite but skeptical. I didn't mind. I recognized that look in their eyes. I'd worn it once distant, guarded, trained to expect disappointment from anyone who tried to inspire. I didn't start with numbers. I didn't start with funding rounds or IPOs. I started with the one thing they couldn't ignore: truth. "When I was 16, I said, my mother told me that staring at a screen too long would ruin my posture and make it harder to marry well." A few kids laughed. One boy whistled. A girl near the front crossed her arms but didn't look away. I didn't come from a family that saw tech as a career. They saw it as a hobby, something to grow out of, like skateboards or comic books. My siblings went to Ivy League schools. I went to my bedroom, built apps that no one used, and taught myself Python on a dial-up connection. Laughter rippled again, but this time it carried a different energy. Connection. They used to call me the black sheep. Now Forbes calls me a healthcare disruptor. I don't share that to brag. I share that because some of you might feel like you're the black sheep too. The one who doesn't fit, the one who hears no more often than your name. I paused, scanning the crowd. They were listening now, not politely, genuinely. "What saved me wasn't talent," I said. "It was stubbornness. I stopped trying to prove myself to people who'd already decided who I was, and I started building something that could speak for itself." The room grew quiet, charged. A girl in the third row, maybe 15, with braids and a sketchbook clutched to her chest, raised her hand. "What if your parents never believe in you?" The question cracked something inside me. I walked closer to the edge of the stage, met her eyes. "Then you build a life so rich, so real, that their belief becomes irrelevant." The silence that followed was heavy and hopeful. Afterward, as students filed out, a few lingered. The girl with the sketchbook handed me a page torn from her notebook, a drawing of a woman standing on a mountaintop, data lines rising from her feet like power. "Thank you," she whispered. "You made me think I can do this." I didn't cry. Not there, not in front of her, but in the car ride back to the office, I let it come. Quietly, quickly. The kind of tears that don't burn, only cleanse. That night, Elise and I stayed late at the office, mapping out our next step, an accelerator program for teenage girls building tech for good projects. We'd fund the top 3 with seed grants and mentorship. It wasn't a PR move, it was legacy. Not the kind my family always talked about, the kind that lives in bloodlines and bank accounts, but a different kind. A better one. The kind built on impact. A week later, I stood on the rooftop of our Kendall Square headquarters, dressed in navy blue for the Forbes photo shoot, with the Boston skyline stretching out behind me. The photographer, a wiry man with too much coffee and too little patience, clicked furiously. "Give me power," he barked. "Give me purpose." I looked into the lens and thought about the girl in the auditorium, the teenage Harper who once hid her coat under her bed, the woman who walked away from a family dinner without dessert, but with her dignity. I didn't need to pose, I just stood there. I was already all those things. The article dropped 3 days later. The woman who rebuilt healthcare and didn't ask permission. My inbox exploded. CNN, TEDx, Harvard Kennedy School. But none of it mattered more than a single email from a name I hadn't seen in years. Evelyn Rojas, my 9th grade computer science teacher. I still remember the first game you made. It had too many frogs and crashed my classroom laptop, but it was brilliant. I'm so proud of you. Keep going. The world needs more Langstons. That night, alone in my loft with the city lights flickering against the windows, I opened my journal for the first time in months and wrote one sentence. They finally see me. But more importantly, I see me. The next morning, my father called. I didn't answer. The voicemail was polite, measured, and full of concern about leveraging the family brand. I deleted it without listening to the end. 5 minutes later, my mother texted, "Heard about the scholarship fund. Wonderful idea. Perhaps we could host a gala to raise awareness. Call me." I didn't respond, but I did forward the message to Elise with a 3-word note: schedule school visit. Because while they were still trying to turn my success into something that could serve them, I had already chosen where I belonged, and it was with the girls and sketchbooks and code, the classrooms with squeaky floors, the future being written in quiet corners, waiting for someone to say, "Yes, you belong too." 6 months after the IPO, the numbers told one story, but the real one was written elsewhere in hospital waiting rooms where appointment delays had been cut from months to days, in rural clinics now connected to specialists 3 states away, in lives quietly improved because someone dared to build what didn't yet exist. Langston Health had grown to 170 employees across 5 offices, and our user base surpassed 1 million. But it wasn't the Wall Street Journal profile or the TechCrunch headlines that made me pause. It was the letter from a mother in Montana who wrote, "Your platform helped diagnose my daughter's tumor in time. Thank you for building what you built. You gave us more time with her." I read that letter in the quiet of my office, holding it in both hands like it might disappear if I didn't. For all the numbers and recognition, that letter reminded me why I'd started. That same week, the Langston Initiative awarded its first full-ride scholarship to a girl named Destiny Ramirez from El Paso, a high school junior who built an app for local women's shelters to share real-time bed availability. She wore sneakers to the gala and cried when Elise handed her the certificate. That moment felt more significant than any champagne toast I'd ever made. Meanwhile, my biological family continued their slow orbit, reaching out in intervals that always seemed timed with headlines. My mother sent invitations to charity events with handwritten notes. "We'd love to honor you this year. So many friends are impressed by what you've done." My father left voicemails about portfolio strategies and long-term family wealth alignment. Camille texted a photo from her baby shower, captioned, "We saved you a seat next to the governor's wife." I kept my replies cordial, infrequent, and controlled. I hadn't cut them off. But I had drawn the line, and I guarded it like my breath. Aunt Lila remained the exception. We met weekly for dinner, sometimes Thai, sometimes her homemade pot roast, and she always asked about Destiny and the scholarship girls before she asked about revenue. "You built something living," she said one night, swirling her wine. "Not just a product, a movement." One chilly March morning, I received an unexpected invitation, the Langston family legacy dinner. Not the usual gathering, but a formal affair at the Beacon Club in downtown Boston, hosted by my father to celebrate the firm's 50th anniversary and honor generational achievements. At first, I laughed. Then I considered. Then I said yes. I didn't accept the invite to prove anything. I accepted it to close a chapter properly, not with resentment, but with resolution. That night, I arrived alone, wearing a midnight blue suit that Elise said made me look like I acquired NASA on the way here. The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers and white roses. Familiar faces mingled near the bar, old money families with firm handshakes and paper-thin smiles. My parents stood near the front table, radiant in evening wear, startled when they saw me. My mother recovered first, gliding toward me with a practiced smile. "You look stunning, darling. So glad you could make it. We weren't sure you'd come." "Neither was I said truthfully. "But I thought it was time." My father extended a hand, the grip firmer than usual, tinged with apology and calculation. "You've done well for yourself, Harper. Truly." "Thank you," I replied. "It's been a good year." During the dinner, I listened as they toasted Nathaniel's new role as managing partner and Camille's consultant expansion. When my name was mentioned, it was brief and to Harper, for her contributions to healthcare technology, a phrase so vague it could have belonged to a medical device technician. I didn't flinch. I didn't need them to tell my story. I had already told it, and the world had listened. As dessert was served, my father leaned in. "I've been meaning to ask, have you considered using the family foundation for the next round of your philanthropy?" I took a sip of water, slow and deliberate. "I've created my own. It's already funding girls in tech across 7 states. "Of course," he said quickly. "But with the Langston name, there's legacy weight, prestige." I smiled, kind but firm. "My initiative is named Langston, too, just not for the family. For me." He blinked. "You mean it's named after the girl you once told to stop wasting time on code? The woman who wasn't invited to the IPO dinner? That Langston." He said nothing more, and in that silence I found peace. Not victory, not triumph, just peace. After the event, as guests filtered out and valet attendants shuffled cars, Camille caught up to me in the marble foyer. "Listen," she said, hesitating. "I know we haven't been close, and I've probably said things that look, I'm not great with tech stuff, okay? But I'm happy for you. Genuinely." "Thank you," I said, and for once I believed her. "It's not too late to build something yourself, Camille. Something real." "I don't know if I know how," she admitted. "You didn't either once," I said. "But you learned." I left the club with the city lights reflecting off wet pavement, stepping into a car driven by Elise, who insisted on picking me up. We didn't speak until the highway curved toward Cambridge, the city behind us growing smaller. "How'd it go?" she asked. "They toasted me with passive-aggressive grace," I said. "But it doesn't matter. I didn't go for them. I went for me." Closure? Not quite, just clarity. The next day, we announced our expansion into the UK healthcare market and launched a new feature that allowed multilingual AI triage for non-English speaking patients. The press ate it up, but I was already thinking of something else. That afternoon, I visited a school in Roxbury. Destiny Ramirez was there as a guest mentor, standing in front of a room full of 8th grade girls who looked at her the way she once looked at me. I watched from the back as she told her story, how an app could be a lifeline, how code could be courage. When the bell rang and the students filtered out, one girl with chipped pink nail polish turned to her friend and whispered, "I didn't know people like us could do that." That was it. That was the moment I understood the full weight of what we were doing. Not building apps, not chasing valuations. We were changing mirrors, changing what young girls saw when they looked at the world and at themselves. That night, I returned home, kicked off my shoes, and opened the window to let in the spring air. My phone buzzed with congratulations, offers, invitations. I turned it face down. I poured a glass of wine, sat on the floor, and opened a letter I had written to myself the night before the IPO. I had never read it since. It said, simply, "You don't need to be seen to matter, but if you're seen, make it count." I smiled and folded it shut again. I didn't need to write another letter. The life I'd built was already the answer.